Aarav Mehta and Rhea Kapoor were the picture of a perfect couple. He, a successful Indian pilot admired for his charm and glamorous lifestyle, and she, a gentle young bride whose only dream was a happy marriage. Their wedding looked like a fairy tale, and their honeymoon in Bora Bora seemed like the ultimate beginning. But within just 5 days, paradise turned into a crime scene, and the man celebrated as a hero was exposed as a killer. This is the shocking true story of how a dream honeymoon ended in brutal tragedy. Aarav Mehta grew up in a well-respected family in Mumbai, where his career as a commercial pilot was considered a source of pride not just for his relatives, but also for the community. His profession carried glamour, a sense of adventure, and financial stability. People often admired his lifestyle. He was the man who posted photos from exotic destinations, wore expensive watches, and drove luxury cars. To outsiders, he seemed like the perfect catch, a young man with charm and status who had the world at his feet. Rhea Kapoor, on the other hand, lived a life shaped by simplicity. Raised in a close-knit family in Delhi, she grew up with values centered on love, respect, and devotion. She wasn't interested in wealth or extravagance. Her dream was to marry someone who would care for her, someone with whom she could build a home filled with warmth and affection. When Aarav and Rhea's families were introduced, it felt like a blessing. Aarav's parents were thrilled to have found a bride who carried such grace and humility, while Rhea's family was impressed by Aarav's accomplishments and polished demeanor. The engagement was celebrated with grandeur, and the wedding that followed was even more lavish. Hundreds of guests filled a decorated hall where chandeliers sparkled and tables overflowed with delicacies. The couple looked radiant together, Aarav in his tailored sherwani and Rhea in her intricately embroidered red lehenga. Cameras flashed as they exchanged vows, and every detail was carefully recorded on social media, where friends and acquaintances showered them with congratulations. It was the kind of wedding people would later describe as magical, one that set the tone for what many believed would be a perfect marriage. The days after the wedding were filled with praise and admiration. Relatives and neighbors spoke of the pair as a symbol of success and beauty. Their photos, shared online, went viral within their circles. Rhea smiling shyly next to her dashing husband, Aarav proudly holding her hand as though they were the very definition of happiness. To those watching from afar, their lives appeared flawless, as if written by destiny itself. The families too basked in the glow, certain that the match had been nothing short of divine. The highlight of this union was the honeymoon planned for Bora Bora, a destination Rhea had whispered about long before marriage. She had always dreamed of seeing its crystal, clear waters, and waking up in one of the iconic overwater villas. Aarav had agreed eagerly, presenting the trip as a gesture of love and indulgence, a way to show his wife that he could fulfill her every desire. When their boarding passes were shared on social media, friends envied their luck. It was the stuff of movies, a young bride flying off with her pilot husband to one of the most beautiful islands in the world. As the plane soared toward their destination, Rhea sat by the window with excitement sparkling in her eyes, believing she was stepping into the kind of love story she had always hoped for. She saw their future as bright and endless, much like the horizon stretching out before her. But what she didn't know was that beneath the surface of this perfect picture, shadows were already forming, and paradise would soon transform into a place of unthinkable horror. At first, Bora Bora was everything Rhea had dreamed of. The turquoise water shimmered under the sunlight, and their private villa seemed to float in the middle of a postcard. Perfect lagoon. She took endless photos, capturing the sunsets, the floral decorations, and the breakfasts delivered to their deck in woven baskets. For a few brief moments, it felt like the fairy tale she had always imagined, a new beginning filled with love and discovery. But as the days went on, small cracks began to appear, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Aarav was no longer the attentive husband she thought she had married. His smile seemed forced, his patience thinner, and his attention elsewhere. He spent hours scrolling on his phone, sometimes stepping out to take calls in hushed tones, leaving Rhea alone in their villa. When she asked him who he was speaking to, he dismissed her with short, clipped answers. His moods swung unpredictably. One moment he was affectionate, and the next he was cold and distant. At dinner, instead of enjoying the island delicacies, he drank heavily, ignoring the meals set before him. The staff noticed the change. Rhea, once radiant and glowing, now appeared withdrawn, quietly picking at her food as Aarav ordered another glass of wine. The idyllic setting became a sharp contrast to the growing tension between them. Other guests at the resort began to notice. Rhea often sat by the pool with a book, staring off into the distance, while Aarav mingled with strangers at the bar. She tried to hide her unease, smiling for photos, but the sadness behind her eyes was hard to miss. A few guests even whispered that they had overheard raised voices late at night, coming from their villa, muffled arguments that carried across the water in the stillness of the lagoon. Behind closed doors, the fights grew louder. Rhea had begun to sense that Aarav's glamorous life was not as perfect as she once thought. She noticed the way he guarded his phone, the way he snapped when she asked too many questions. Every inquiry seemed to trigger his anger, as if she was trespassing into a part of him he didn't want her to see. When arguments broke out, they escalated quickly, leaving her frightened of his temper. Yet the next morning, they always appeared in public together, smiling for photos, giving the illusion of happiness. The paradise that Rhea had so eagerly awaited began to feel like a trap. The villa, once a dream come true, now seemed isolated and suffocating. She no longer looked forward to the excursions and dinners she had planned. Instead, she braced herself for the unpredictable storm of Aarav's moods. For her, Bora Bora had transformed from a symbol of romance into a place of loneliness and fear. Each sunset felt heavier, as if it was carrying a warning. What had started as a celebration of love was rapidly unraveling into something darker, and the silence of the island only magnified the secrets lurking beneath their perfect facade. The fifth night of their stay in Bora Bora began like any other, but small details foreshadowed the darkness to come. The resort was hosting a lively beachside party, complete with music, fire dancers, and cocktails served under torchlight. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, and dancing barefoot in the sand. Rhea tried to lose herself in the atmosphere, hoping for one night where she and Aarav could reconnect. She wore a light summer dress, her hair loose, her smile hopeful. At first it seemed to work. They danced briefly, shared a drink, and posed for a few pictures. But as the night went on, Aarav grew restless. He drank heavily, his laughter turning loud and abrasive, his eyes constantly darting toward Rhea as if watching her every move. The moment that shattered the fragile peace came when Rhea struck up a casual conversation with another couple at the party. They were tourists from Europe, chatting about their travels and offering tips about the island. Rhea's laughter, light and genuine, seemed to ignite something violent inside Aarav. His expression darkened, his jaw tightened, and the glass in his hand trembled as he downed the last sip of alcohol. He pulled away abruptly, retreating to the bar, where he ordered another drink. From that moment onward, his gaze followed her like a shadow, filled with suspicion and unspoken rage. By the time they returned to their overwater villa, the night had soured completely. The walk back was silent, tense, and heavy with unspoken words. As soon as the door closed behind them, the silence exploded into anger. Aarav's accusations poured out, sharp and cutting, his voice carrying across the wooden beams of the villa. Rhea's attempts to calm him only fueled his fury. The sound of shouting grew louder, echoing out over the still lagoon. Guests staying in nearby villas later recalled hearing furniture scraping against the floor, glass shattering, and the unmistakable crash of something heavy hitting the walls. The violence escalated rapidly. What began as an argument spiraled into chaos. A wine glass shattered against the floor, fragments scattering across the deck. Furniture was overturned in the struggle, and the sound of repeated thuds filled the night air. Rhea's cries were muffled by the closed doors, but they were cut short, replaced by chilling silence. The turquoise lagoon beneath their villa carried only the faint reflection of flickering lights, unaware of the horror unfolding above it. Hours later, as dawn broke, the once vibrant villa had become eerily quiet. The housekeeping staff, making their morning rounds, knocked gently before entering. What they found turned the dreamlike resort into a nightmare. Rhea's body lay motionless on the wooden deck, her skin marked with bruises and injuries too severe to be mistaken for an accident. The glass shards and bloodstains told a grim story of violence and desperation. The air, once filled with the scent of flowers and sea salt, was now heavy with dread. The honeymoon that had promised love and beauty had ended in brutal tragedy, the paradise around them forever tainted by a single night of rage. Tragedy spread through the resort with alarming speed. Guests who had seen the couple smiling at dinner the night before now whispered in shock as police boats arrived at the overwater villa. Staff members stood in clusters, shaken by the gruesome discovery. The tropical island, usually alive with carefree laughter and clinking glasses, had fallen into a tense silence. Local authorities wasted no time sealing off the villa, placing yellow tape across the walkway that only hours earlier had been lit with romantic lanterns. The image of paradise was shattered, and the villa that once promised honeymoon bliss was now a crime scene. Investigators moved quickly to piece together what had happened. The scene inside the villa told a story that Aarav's words could not explain away. Broken furniture lay scattered across the room, with shards of glass embedded in the carpet. Bloodstains were smeared across the deck, a grim reminder of the struggle that had unfolded. The body bore signs of repeated assault, bruises on the arms, cuts across the face, and fatal head trauma that indicated more than a single fall. A medical examiner later confirmed what the investigators already suspected. Rhea had suffered prolonged violence, not a tragic accident. When Aarav was questioned, his explanation was riddled with contradictions. He insisted that Rhea had slipped on the deck after drinking, hitting her head on the edge of the table. He claimed he had tried to revive her but panicked when he couldn't. Yet the evidence around him told another story. Neighbors in nearby villas reported hearing shouting well past midnight, followed by the sounds of objects breaking. Security cameras from the resort showed Aarav stumbling drunkenly back from the party, his movements unsteady, his face visibly angry. Rhea, in contrast, had walked ahead of him quietly, her shoulders tense but her steps steady. The investigators began to build a timeline. The evening had started at the party, where multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Aarav become visibly upset when Rhea spoke with other guests. Several tourists admitted they saw him leave the bar in a foul mood, while Rhea remained calm. Later, staff on night duty remembered hearing a loud crash followed by silence from the villa. These accounts, combined with the physical evidence, created a picture of escalating violence that left little room for Aarav's version of events. Within days, Aarav was formally arrested. News outlets across the island and back in India picked up the story, their headlines capturing the shocking fall of a man once admired for his success and polished image. Reporters described the case as the unraveling of a glamorous facade, a tale of wealth and power destroyed by uncontrolled rage. In Bora Bora, the case quickly became the center of attention, drawing crowds to the courthouse and sparking debates among locals and tourists alike. The one celebrated pilot now sat behind bars in a foreign land, his uniform replaced by a prison jumpsuit. The honeymoon that had begun with envy and admiration ended with him in handcuffs, facing the reality of a murder charge. The island, though still beautiful, now carried the memory of a crime that no turquoise water or golden sunset could wash away. The trial that followed drew intense attention both in Bora Bora and in India, where people struggled to reconcile the glamorous image of Aarav Mehta with the grim reality of what he had done. Courtrooms on the island were small, designed for local cases, but now they were packed with reporters, international media, and curious onlookers who wanted to witness every twist of the proceedings. Aarav sat in silence most of the time, dressed in plain prison attire, his once confident demeanor replaced with a hardened expression. For someone used to commanding attention as a pilot, he now looked like a man cornered, stripped of his identity and control. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically, painting a chilling picture of the fatal night. Photos of the villa showed shattered glass, overturned furniture, and bloodstains across the floorboards. Forensic experts testified that Rhea's injuries were consistent with repeated blows, not a single fall as Aarav had claimed. They explained that she had been assaulted over a period of time, her body showing signs of defensive wounds that suggested she had fought desperately for her life. Witnesses from the resort described hearing loud arguments, followed by silence that felt ominous in the stillness of the lagoon. Security footage showing Aarav's drunken return to the villa became a key piece of evidence, undercutting his story of a tragic accident. But the most shocking developments came when the investigation dug deeper into Aarav's past. Several women from India stepped forward, giving statements about his abusive behavior in previous relationships. Some described how he had been controlling and manipulative, quick to anger when challenged. One revealed that she had considered going to the police years earlier but decided against it, fearing his wealth and influence. These testimonies painted a disturbing pattern of behavior, showing that the violence against Rhea was not an isolated incident, but the continuation of a hidden side to Aarav's character. Financial records added another layer to the revelations. Investigators uncovered large gambling debts that Aarav had been keeping secret, debts that threatened the polished image he maintained. Alongside this, evidence of multiple affairs surfaced, including text messages that hinted at ongoing relationships with women abroad. Rhea had begun to piece some of this together even before the honeymoon, confiding in a close friend that she had doubts about who Aarav really was. Her decision to confront him during the trip may have been the trigger that pushed his volatile temper over the edge. When the verdict was delivered, the courtroom was silent. Aarav was found guilty of second-degree murder, the jury rejecting his claims of innocence. The sentence was harsh: life in prison on the island, far from his homeland and the luxury he once enjoyed. The man who had lived above the clouds as a pilot was now confined to a cell, his future reduced to iron bars and isolation. Back in India, the news devastated Rhea's family. Their daughter, who had left for her honeymoon full of dreams and hope, had returned only as a memory, her life cut short by the very person who had promised to protect her. The story became a grim reminder of how appearances can deceive, how behind the filtered photos and smiling posts there can be secrets darker than anyone imagines. The case left a scar not only on those who loved Rhea, but also on the countless people who followed the trial, a haunting example of how paradise can hide tragedy.